Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. To really wrap our heads around the ancient living blueprint of Judaism, we're going to use the metaphor of a great tree. By looking at how its deep historical roots literally nourish its modern branches, we can get a much clearer picture of the collective spiritual, cultural, and legal traditions of the Jewish people. So here's our roadmap for today. 1. The roots, exploring the origins and the covenant. 2. The trunk, which is the Torah. 3. The branches, representing modern denominations. And 4. The leaves and fruit, looking at holidays. All right, part 1, roots, origins, and covenant. Let's head below the surface to uncover the profound historical and spiritual origins of the faith. Tracing the history back, these roots start somewhere around the 20th to 18th century BCE with the biblical patriarch Abraham in Mesopotamia. Then, jumping to a massive pivotal moment in 1312 BCE, we have God formalizing the laws and commandments with Moses at Mount Sinai. From there, moving into the first millennium BCE, we see the development of Rabbinic Judaism, which established the oral traditions that would carry the faith forward for millennia. Now, this is actually incredibly fascinating. The Hebrew word brit, which translates to covenant, originally derived from a word meaning shackle or chain, literally a binding agreement or a solemn contract between two parties. In the Hebrew Bible, this is the ultimate metaphor used to describe the relationship between God and the people of Israel. It grants a very specific status, but it's one that comes with absolute obligations. And you can see the exact terms of that contract, the one formalized at Mount Sinai, spelled out clearly right here in Exodus. God is setting very specific conditions, promising to bless the Israelites and make them a treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, but entirely in exchange for their obedience to the laws. Participation in that salvation gift is directly tied to binding themselves to these stipulations. Now, you might be thinking, shackles sounds a bit harsh, right? But the crucial takeaway is that this covenant wasn't meant to be some restrictive, crushing weight. In the context of ancient Israelite law, it's actually framed much more like a parent-child relationship. Think about it. Just as a parent gives strict but loving guidance to keep a child safe, the divine law was offered as a protective, benevolent framework for the people to live their best lives by. And we still see this binding agreement physically represented today through the Brit Milah, or bris, typically performed by a trained mohel on a newborn's 8th day. It serves as a visible, lifelong sign of acceptance into that ongoing, ancient covenant between God and the Jewish people. Moving right along to part 2, the trunk, the Torah. As we travel up from the roots, we hit the core texts that anchor the entire faith. Breaking down the Hebrew again, the word Torah is often translated just as law, but fundamentally it means instruction or teaching. Rabbinic tradition views this text as unimaginably profound. In fact, the Midrash even states that the Torah was created before the world itself and served as the literal divine blueprint for all of existence. It is absolutely the central grounding pillar of the religion. The written Torah, famously known as the 5 Books of Moses, provides that bedrock foundation. It kicks off with Genesis, detailing the creation of the world, then moves through the descent into Egypt and the giving of the law in Exodus and Leviticus, and finally wraps up in Deuteronomy with the death of Moses right before the Israelites cross over into the Promised Land. But here is where it gets really interesting. Rabbinic tradition holds that this instruction actually has 2 intertwined parts. God didn't just hand down the written Torah at Sinai. He provided an oral Torah right alongside it. Passed down from generation to generation and eventually written down in the Mishnah, Talmud, and Midrash, this oral tradition provides the vital, ongoing interpretation, the case law, and the rabbinic commentary you need to actually understand and apply the written text. Which brings us to part 3, branches, modern denominations. Out of that single massive trunk grow the branches, the incredibly diverse ways modern communities put these ancient texts into action. So we have to ask a pretty fascinating question. How exactly do different groups apply a millennia-old blueprint, the halacha, or Jewish way of life, to our modern, fast-paced world? Because there's no single central authority vesting power in one person, different movements have naturally developed entirely different approaches to interpreting the Torah. Let's start with Orthodox Judaism. This branch maintains that the laws handed down to Moses are explicitly divine in origin, eternally binding, and simply unchanging. This means strict traditional observance in everyday life, like observing Shabbat without turning on electricity or driving, and strictly keeping kosher. And within this branch, you have various subsets. You've got modern Orthodox, who harmonize that strict observance with secular modernity, all the way to Haredi and Hasidic Jews, who often maintain distinctive traditional dress and keep more separated from modern secular culture. Now, occupying a middle ground on this spectrum is conservative Judaism, which is actually known as Masorti Judaism outside of North America. They maintain that halakha is absolutely binding, but they teach that it's dynamic. It has always naturally evolved to meet modern conditions. They accept modern scholarly study of the Bible while holding on to traditional customs. Practically speaking, this might mean permitting driving to the synagogue on the Sabbath, and today, most conservative synagogues feature fully egalitarian prayer for men and women. Meanwhile, Reform Judaism, sometimes called progressive or liberal Judaism, takes a much more universalist approach. They view the ancient halakhic laws as general ethical guidelines rather than strict, unyielding rules. Reform Judaism generally steps away from many of the ritual and ceremonial laws to put a massive focus on moral mandates and the ethical call of the prophets. Their services are highly egalitarian and often conducted in the local language alongside Hebrew. And this ethos is perfectly captured by their focus on tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. For the Reform movement, social action, standing up against discrimination, and pursuing peace isn't just an extra thing they do. It is the very translation of the Torah into the real world. The absolute key thing to remember here, we aren't looking at this spectrum to say one approach is right and another is wrong. Not at all. These branches represent a rich, pluralistic spectrum of how to honor the exact same ancient covenant today. From strict adherence to an unchanging divine code to a dynamic focus on evolving ethical mandates, each denomination is just a distinct, valid way of living out the faith. All right, part 4, leaves and fruit, holidays and sacred time. Finally, we reach the daily practices and rhythmic cycles that bring the religion to life. This is where the tradition really breathes day to day. A sacred rhythm to the year anchors communities worldwide. You have the high holy days like Rosh Hashanah for the New Year and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Then there are the pilgrimage festivals like Pesach or Passover. These holidays directly connect modern families right back to the historical events and agricultural roots laid out in the Torah. And woven right into that annual calendar is the weekly observance of Shabbat, the day of rest. Happening every single week, Shabbat acts as a constant, rhythmic renewal of that ancient covenant we talked about earlier. Whether a family unplugs completely from technology in an Orthodox home or shares a special communal meal in a Reform setting, it remains an absolute cornerstone of sacred time. So, bringing our whole tree metaphor full circle, from the ancient shackles of the root covenant formed in the desert, growing up through the rich instructional trunk of the written and oral Torah, Judaism has successfully blossomed into a brilliant, living canopy of practice. It sustains millions of people in a myriad of different, beautiful ways. Which leaves us with a pretty massive question to ponder. Judaism has survived and adapted for thousands of years by interpreting its core texts to meet the moment. So, as our modern world continues to shift at an absolutely unprecedented pace, how will the branches of this ancient living tree adapt next? It's a fascinating question, and one that the next generation of scholars and practitioners are already answering.